guys think it's time?
We'll call it.
Yeah, that's close enough. Yeah, 3:31, so if anybody else walks in. My name is Jeff Chasteen. I'll be the moderator for this session, and I don't know the exact title of what it is, but I think it's Augmented Reality versus Virtual Reality. Whose Kung Fu is better? That's close enough. That's something along the lines. And we had talked about it before and talked about what we wanted to present and how we wanted to present it, and we felt it would be a little bit better to have it more on the discussion format. If you've seen panels before, then you know that it's an open question. Anything that's related to what we're talking about, if you have a question about it, feel free to raise your hand and ask any of our panelists some of these questions that you have. So I think what we'll do is we'll just start by everyone introducing themselves, and then we'll kick it off from there. So,
hi, I'm Timothy Johnson. I am a former Atlanta resident. I had a studio here for several years called No You Shut Up Games. Last year I sold most of it off. What we did there was some original IP, some AR games, but we mostly did like Cartoon Network, Adventure Time games, Nickelodeon, Disney, stuff like that. Last year I sold it and moved out to Berkeley, California, where I am now, for a company called, it's a startup called Sentertainment, founded by Will Wright, the guy who did SimCity and The Sims, and the former CEO of EA, John Riccatello. The two of them, Shanghai. I don't know why they're there.
My name is Bobby Blackwolf. I'm actually not a developer for these, but I'm a media. I do a podcast, and I run a video game or a geek culture network of podcasts and internet radio. I heavily covered the Oculus Rift last year. I was one of the first journalists to cover the Oculus Rift, so I've kind of been on the virtual side since its infancy in its rebirth last year, and I've been covering the Dev Kit 1 and the Dev Kit 2. So I've kind of seen a lot of other people's designs, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And so that's kind of what I bring here.
And my name is Scott McCutcheon. I'm the founder of Sovereign Studios and the webmaster here at the Georgia Game Developers Association. For the last almost 2 years, I've spent experimenting with alternate perspectives in virtual reality and using the Oculus Rift mostly. And a lot of what's come out of that is a virtual reality shmup, a shoot 'em up, little space shooter that I built that I call Endless Reach. It's okay.
I saw the video. It is cool.
Right, and I'm just trying to work with alternate perspectives and try and make games as diverse as possible, continuing with the future of the medium.
And I'm Jeff Chasteen. I did my PhD in augmented reality, and that was, I guess I graduated in 2007, and one of my first projects, I guess, was in 1999, 2000 era. So it's interesting to see how augmented reality has changed and the platforms that it's being pushed onto. Probably my first project was in touring with Duran Duran. If anybody remembers them, the rock band Duran Duran, and they wanted to be the first band to use augmented reality, and so they were kind of borderline on how they did it. But I can talk about that later if we run out of things to talk about. So I guess at this point we'll open it up for any kinds of discussion or any questions that you might have. The main topic that we're supposed to be talking about is what the differences are between augmented reality and virtual reality. So are there any questions out there? Because if not, I'll start asking generic questions that might trigger questions.
So how would one delineate virtual reality versus augmented reality?
Okay, well, the way that I look at it is virtual reality takes over your senses, and augmented reality goes on top of your existing senses. Now, the question I also want to ask is, what do we consider augmented reality? Is it just things like face radars on the 3DS where you're looking around and it's putting objects over you, or do you also consider something like Ingress augmented reality because it takes your GPS data, and even though it's not putting anything over your eyes or anything, but it's still using your location data to close portals, and you have to be close to stuff. So I think that would be kind of the big difference, is augmented supplants your existing senses where virtual takes over your senses.
I would completely agree with that. Most of the time when we think of augmented reality, we're thinking of some kind of visualization that you'll see some kind of marquee or billboard being projected on mapped 3D plane. But it could be something as simple as just having a vibration in your phone or in your watch as you're near something. A good one would be if in an industrial scene where you're getting closer and closer to high voltage things that are going to kill you, to have something in your work glove that would vibrate, be like, oh, if I move my head beyond this point, I will die. So essentially, adding to your senses. Where with VR you are then immersed. You're probably not going to be walking around if you're using VR either. That would be cool.
They're trying it though.
Yeah, I think that's going to become something that they're really going to work on, where they will untether you from the computer. At some point you'll be able to really kind of move around and really expand the world that you're in.
Right.
And Valve already does something like that with what they call their VR room, right? Where it's basically just like a series of cameras all over the room that watches somebody, freak out or do whatever they're doing in the room. Just to give you more space to really allow you to expand.
And Oculus did that too at the Oculus Connect conference. They had the Crescent Bay prototype,
Right.
which is like it's the first iteration of what between the Dev Kit 2 and either a third Dev Kit or the consumer version, and it was in a 5x5 grid, and you could walk around in that 5 foot by 5 foot area and look around at things.
Yeah, and I mean something else they've been doing a lot is with the treadmill, right? So like they put you in this little, it's like a stand, I guess, and you can kind of run around and on the treadmill like you're in place really, but it allows you to really just kind of expand in that virtual world, while in place, and that could be a technology that they could bring into your living room at that point.
I see the Omni being something that would be very, very useful, but I see if you're in a 5x5 room with absolutely no vision to the real room, that's just key for shenanigans. Right. Someone's going to trip you. A cat's going to jump in front of you. So that sounds awful.
I think I look at the differences between the two in terms of maybe the development piece, because in augmented reality, there is some overlap between it clearly, and you have tracking requirements and everything else, but in augmented reality, the tracking requirements are so strict. You can be a little bit sloppy in virtual reality because you can, if things don't line up and you're not exactly tracking the user's viewpoint, who cares? You're a little bit off, but you're really not going to notice that, at least from the user's experience. Whereas in augmented reality, if I point over and I'm looking at this bottle and I'm even an inch off, then the user experience is really just starting to tank. And so tracking to me is one of the keys, and then the display technology as well. Those two, to me, are really where we start to differentiate between the VR and the AR aspects of that.
I think the key thing there was really about creating presence, right? Which is what both technologies are kind of about, but augmented reality doesn't need to create presence because you already have presence by just sitting here in the room. You're already present. Virtual reality, when it replaces that world around you, it has to recreate all of that presence. So it has to, you run by different rules while you're in there. So a lot of that, could be, is I think why virtual reality hasn't really gone as far, been as successful as some of the augmented reality technologies, simply because they have a difficult time recreating presence like we experience it now.
Yeah, in augmented reality, you can look down and see your body.
Right.
In virtual reality, somebody has to make your body for you and put it in there.
It's a lot more
And like a lot of like the earlier roller coaster ones, people would look down, they're like, I don't have a body. And so that kind of takes them out of it. So there were some other roller coaster experiences where they did put a body, and they're like, oh, I have skinny legs now. Okay, so it's kind of hard to do that. That's kind of the hurdle that you have to have with virtual that you don't really need with augmented.
When I first got the Rift, the very first thing that happened was I put it on and I was like, oh, look at the Tuscany demo that came out with it, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's amazing. Couldn't find my keyboard whatsoever. And then it was like, okay, well, where's my controller? I was like, oh, looking, and then I got in that half state where you kind of leave a little bit of room so you can find your hands, and I'm pretty sure I was going to vomit. So, just a fun story to tell. I don't play with that.
Yeah, that's something that interests me a lot, is actually how to control in virtual reality or even augmented reality. Like, how do you interact with these virtual objects? That's something that's obviously very difficult. No one's really solved it yet as to like the perfect input that's universal for everybody. I use a 360 controller for most of my games, which just because it's there, it's the most accessible gamepad out there that most people will have, and it's definitely not the best input. But if we had a way to, maybe it's like haptic feedback gloves or just some type of motion tracking or something that allows you to really reach out and grab a virtual object, and truly interact with it the same way we interact with things in the real until we get there, I mean, the technology is just not here.
And we're thinking Oculus is working on some kind of input device and stuff because they're going to need something for the consumer version, some type of standard input that developers can, and I mean the STEM system's coming out, which is the sequel to the Razer Hydra, which are these, they both look like Wii nunchucks, but then there's a base over here and it actually tracks in 3D position your hands and stuff. And the Razer Hydra is buggy. I hate using it.
Actually,
It
it's the
never works.
reverse. The Hydra,
Does
that
it?
center thing emits an
Okay,
electromagnetic field
yeah.
that the things are.
Shows how much I've used it.
Science.
Well, we know Facebook just bought Oculus, and I guess the thinking was, it's like, yeah, I can see why they may want to use that, but what are your thoughts on why Facebook may have, just truly just investment, or how would they start to utilize that with Facebook?
Okay, Zuckerberg thought it was cool.
Yeah.
That's the
Pretty
basis
much.
of it, and a lot of people don't believe that, but he honestly thought it was cool, and frankly, Oculus was not going to survive.
Yeah.
Sony had just launched the talked about the Morpheus, showed the Morpheus. There was no way Oculus could compete with Sony's worldwide distribution manufacturing network. Oculus was going to be gone next year, and Facebook coming in, they've done a lot of good things that a lot of people gloss over. So I honestly think Zuckerberg just thought it was cool and thought, he used Facebook's money to invest in it and take the risk. I do think Facebook eventually would love to recreate the Ready Player One metaverse, Snow Crash metaverse, and using Facebook's technology. But I think in the short term, they just want to get this in people's homes, and they saw that Oculus was on the right path, except they didn't have the money to do it. And now they have the money to do it, and so they'll piggyback in a couple of years to release Facebook for Oculus. And I think that's where they're going to try to get their return on their investment, but they're not looking at getting a return on their investment in the short term.
So we're supposed to be repeating questions. The question was, why did Facebook buy Oculus?
Yes.
Sorry. We're supposed to be repeating all the questions. Keep going.
I was done.
Oh, okay.
Unless you had something to add.
The
solid assessment.
So the Oculus office is actually very close to where I work, and so when it happened, I walked over there, and then I actually just went because I was very unhappy when I heard. I'm sure that was a mixed bag. I was kind of unhappy. So I went over there and then had lunch with a couple of the guys, and some of them were, they were all like, no, it's going to be good. We have the money now. There was a lot of theories that they were throwing out. These are all lower level guys that weren't part of the conversation, but the talk in the Valley is that Facebook is, if you look at what Facebook's been doing, they've been losing traction in lots of places over the past 18 months, and Facebook gaming was huge, and now Facebook gaming is really down. So it's one of those things where I kind of applaud them for trying to be forward thinking. They're like, well, maybe VR, especially the Rift got so popular so quick, that they were just trying to, be some forward thinking and like, okay, well maybe if it does go, we can be part of it. Or, if it doesn't, then we have the backup plan that you just said, which is to, just leverage it.
Right, and Facebook, I think, just realized they can't just be Facebook.com. They don't want to be a one-trick pony, because what if Facebook.com, what if Elo finally destroys Facebook or whatever? They want to have something else, and so it's not necessarily that they're trying to make it where you have to click like to use the next Rift experience. I don't think that's the case.
No, I think it was more just allowing them, to gain the funding to be able to do the things that they need to do to bring it to a mass market. Facebook has such a large user base. I don't even know the number on it, but it's got to be close to 1 billion, maybe more, right? I don't know. But just to be able to push that device to that many users and have the funding to do it now. Facebook is valued at something like 54 billion, I think last I looked at. So a $2 billion buyout with an extra 54 billion behind you to back it, to bring it to market, that's a lot. It allows you to hire people like John Carmack and Michael Abrash, smartest people on the planet for programming, one of them. So.
And one of the things I do hear a lot, that I heard especially early on, is, people would say Facebook has, they have a history of closed source, and they're going to close the source, and it's the SDK is closed source, and they're closed hardware, and they have a history of this, and I'm like, really? And so
they really don't.
and I investigated this, because I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to find this. I found their GitHub repository for Facebook. Okay, they run the largest website written in PHP, which a lot of people don't like PHP, but the fact is they run the largest successful website running PHP. They have like over 100 GitHub repositories, open source under the Apache license, of all the auxiliary stuff that they made for their website. And things that make it run, and a lot of other people use it, and then other contributors have gone in and contributed it, and it's gone, had a life of its own. And in terms of hardware, they are running the Open Compute project, which is an open sourced hardware. It's a data center that's all open source, all the switches, all the network racks, all that stuff, it's all open source. Facebook's running that. So they actually have this huge library of open source hardware and software, and everybody's like, they've got such a history of closed source and they're going to kill Oculus. I'm like, but they didn't before. Why are they going to do that now?
Yeah, I think that's just misinformation.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
It's like you hear the stories, it doesn't matter if they're true, the fact is you hear them.
Yeah.
And that's all that matters to some people.
I have a quick question to interject, because it seems like most of the questions that are coming and most of the discussion is oriented around the Oculus Rift. So you guys have probably been in VR long enough to see that there's always these peaks and there's hype that's associated with it, and saying this is finally the time for VR to make its way into the average user's hands. Do you think we're at that point right now?
I know they did that. There was a big similar social reaction in like the early '90s, like '93 when they did that, and then the Virtual Boy came out and it was massively unsuccessful.
VFX1.
Right, yeah, all that good stuff.
Dactyl Nightmare.
Yeah.
Anybody remember Dactyl Nightmare?
But I think the recent advances we've made in mobile technology have truly begun to make this possible. Where we can actually achieve presence and in the virtual world. I still don't think it's there yet. I think it'll be another 5 years maybe. But I mean, we'll get a consumer version, an early version next year. Real quick. If not sooner, it'll be this year maybe.
And in the sense of augmented reality, it's already in the consumer's hands. Both the 3DS and the Vita came with little AR cards. But it was mostly, and the thing that's kind of holding AR back a little tiny bit maybe, or maybe, it's probably getting better now, is that it does seem more like a gimmick. I'll put this card down here, Mario is now a 3D thing, and you can look around. Or you can do the Face Raiders game where you're shooting your friend's face on the 3DS. And so that's what a lot of people see the augmented reality is. That's why I brought up, do we consider Ingress an AR game? Because that's getting, Google bought Ingress, and a lot of people are playing that, and that's, I consider that AR, even though it's not overlapping your vision, but it's because it's using your GPS, and you have to work together and go places to close portals and things like that. What have you seen in terms of like AR's acceptance or?
Well, so I'm in the chair of Augmented World Expo, and I was one of the judges for the Augie Awards, and I got to see a lot of really interesting things. The thing is, though, the biggest player in augmented reality right now is Dacry, and they are completely commercial. They are trying to get augmented technology into the commercial industrial space. And so they've got really amazing, impressive demos where they have this like HVAC mechanical compressor unit that they have all tagged up. And then they use their own headset. They're using a headset that they built themselves. And you can look around and it's got the instructions on how to repair it. It's got the instructions of what is busted inside it. It's pretty interesting. And they've got wonderful tech demos of this stuff. But then when you actually like, hey, can I go play with that right now? They're like, well, you can, but unless you're not under lab circumstances, it's a pretty buggy, jumpy experience. I've been burned so many times by virtual reality. I've fallen in and out of love with it. Like in the 90s, the Lawnmower Man. I mean, and then it even made its way into Jurassic Park. There's a scene where there's a guy with a VR headset and gloves manipulating DNA.
And hackers.
Oh,
Yeah.
Unix. I know Unix.
Yeah. So it comes down to our tech is getting better. Things are getting much more accessible, and we're doing it. But I think one of the bigger things we need to figure out is it something that we actually want, or is it something that's actually useful? I'll give you another example of a technology that we all dreamed about, which was just a video phone call. We dreamed about that for years. Demolition Man even had a naked girl call him as a wrong number. Like it was just like, this is the future. And then we got it, and we got it in the early 2000s. And Google Video Chat, and then Skype, obviously, and all these things that can do it. And how often do you literally use that. I use it a little bit more because I travel sometimes. I want to see my kids and things like that. But if I'm on a phone call, normally I don't even call them. I text them because I don't like talking on the phone. It's just one of those things where it's like, is VR, now that we can do it and it is cool and it's here, is it what we really want?
I want to just interject like 30 seconds. If you get a chance, it ties into this. Look for the 1992 ad campaign by AT&T narrated by Tom Selleck, the You Will.
Yeah.
Like 95% of that all came true. They're like, what if you could choose, watch any movie you wanted right then? And it, and it shows, and like, what if you could send a fax from the beach and stuff? Like, all of it's true except for the end, and the company that brings it to you is AT&T. That's how they all, that's the part that's not true, but everything else we have now. So just go look those up. It's really neat.
Well, with other technologies that, I don't know, we purchased an Emotive headset a few years back, and we tested it out, and it's been a little bit buggy, and we're trying to, it really led us to think, well, gosh, if this technology starts to really go forward, that might be some kind of component that would help with a virtual environment, because then that would kind of release the restrictions of your space, and controls. But do you guys have any, comments about that type of technology, or where that might be going in conjunction with virtual reality?
Could you repeat the question?
It's about the emotive
Yeah,
headset, right?
yeah.
So the question is, I'm sorry, trying to repeat it to the microphone here. So the question is,
How does the technology such as the Emotive headset have an impact on virtual reality?
okay,
Or
so
do you
does
think
the
it
emotive headset have technology like that have an impact on virtual reality? Okay.
I guess I could comment on that. A student of mine researched the emotive headset, and it's one of these things, and it actually kind of all ties together, in my opinion. You've got technologies that are coming out kind of left and right. For example, the Kinect. Look at the Kinect, or look at AR or VR, the Rift, or any of the stuff that's coming out. And the overarching problem is that there's a barrier, there's a cost associated with using that technology. And you have to have an application overcome that cost. Is it really worth it to put this giant Rift on my face, or to hold my phone up and stare around at the world for 15 minutes until I can't feel my arms anymore? So there's this cost that's associated with, and with the emotive, it's even higher, because you've got to wet all the pads and you've got to do all of that kind of stuff. And then you've got to train the system to recognize what's going on. And so I went through that, and I was only partway successful.
Yeah.
So there's a user acceptance that's associated that I think is going to drive how this technology is used. And so with the VR, are we going to see VR in people's houses? Is there a reason to have VR? Can we get the same experience, or a close enough experience, just looking at this giant monitor and get the same information, or a close enough experience that I don't have to hook up all of these cords and everything? So I think with the emotive, there's certainly possibility there. And I don't think we've even seen the surface even remotely close to what this is going to be able to do in the future. But how are we going to interact with it? And I poll my students a lot, and it's changing every year. I say, everybody's seen The Matrix, and you've seen the scene where the guy jacks into the Matrix and sticks that giant needle up into your head. And I used to ask that right when The Matrix came out. I said, how many of you would do that? And nobody, maybe one hand would go up. And it was this joke, haha. And then as time has gone on, more and more generational folks have said, yes, I would actually be willing to do this. And then I make the joke, well, what if it's running Windows, and haha, I think there's a user training bit to it as well, because I think we'll see that the later generations are more willing to do things that we, being the older generation, aren't willing to do.
If I could say one really neat thing I saw at Augmented World Expo that I immediately cut the kid a check. I was like, I want in. It's a new use for VR. Because like all the VR I see is, it's you're in a world and there you are. But what he had done was he has a lazy eye, and so
Diplopia is
it is, yeah. And so he has a lazy eye, and he's never seen anything in 3D. I mean, the real world, yes, but not like movies. Like that's never worked on him because of his vision. So he ended up. There was a TED talk on how you can fix this, or maybe fix it. There was some research done. So he got a Rift, and the trick is that you're looking at a cube that's spinning, and the strong when you have a vision issue, you usually have one eye that's dominant, and the other one just kind of doesn't do much. So he would dim just that side would dim to make the weaker eye have to take over and kick in. And he wrote it in like 35 minutes because it's just a spinning cube in Unity. And he wrote it in like 35 minutes, and it was the first 3D object he'd ever seen. And I was like, there we go. Now here's it used for VR, and it's Diplopia is the name of the company. He just came out of an accelerator with a startup. I went ahead and gave him, not much money. I don't have a lot, but I was like, here you go. You need money, and I went in. And that's like the first time I saw VR being like really a good use case, other than like, now I'm in France or Tuscany. Like I can get that same I'm in France or Tuscany in other ways.
Yeah, see, and the reason I knew about it is because he and I have talked a lot, because I know he has strabismus. I don't have strabismus, but I am stereoblind.
Okay.
The Rift was one of the first times I saw 3D. One of my first 3D experiences of actually seeing something in 3D was, okay, so if you go if you've ever been in the Tuscany demo, you go in the house, and you go up the stairs, and there's 2 candles right to the right of a window. It's the first 3D object I've ever seen.
Right on, man.
Was that. And it's because I had lazy eye surgery when I was like 18 months old, and so, but I don't see in 3D. Like right now I'm not looking at 3D. I can see images in the 3DS. That's the only synthetic 3D I can see if it's really, the parallax is strong. But Tuscany was one of the first times I actually saw something. And I just stared at those candles for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, wow. And like other people go up to those candles, same candles, and stare at them too. And I'm like, so it must be really pronounced. They're like, no, that's just exactly what it looks like in real life. I'm like, that's how you see the world all the time. So I've kind of been excited about, maybe the marriage of augmented and virtual reality was, if they get the latency down, put stereoscopic cameras on the front of the Rift, and that would be corrective lenses for people like me. Diplopia, unfortunately, doesn't treat my condition, so it doesn't do anything for me. Because I was one of the very first alpha testers, because I wrote an article about it, my experience, and it got on Reddit and on all these sites and stuff, so he reached out to me. And so I was a backer early on, and I was in the alpha, and I'm like, yeah, unfortunately, my eye condition this isn't for, but I definitely back it, and hopefully it'll help other people.
I'm curious about about successful applications of the Oculus or augmented reality, but I wanted to mention that I used to work at Giant Studios, and they did the Avatar movie, so I think that's probably a very good case for augmented reality, holding a monitor that is actually a camera, and it's being tracked by the motion capture system, so they would have a whole row of people basically creating graphics that, as James Cameron looked at the screen at the people over there, he would see the previous set. And after Avatar, other studios started building motion capture camera labs, so it's pretty common in movies now to have the layout artists go in and record the camera motion that they use in the movies.
Yeah, I've seen that. A lot.
So your question, I guess.
So my question,
yeah, sorry.
I've done a little bit of Oculus development, but I haven't actually heard any successful games, or, the Tuscany demo is like the only demo I've actually seen that doesn't make you sick.
Okay, so you're asking, the question is, are there any successful VR games that
Right.
exist?
Not yet, because the Oculus isn't out.
Yeah, I don't think the market's large enough to actually be able to make any commercially successful software for the Oculus.
And AAA studios were staying away.
Right.
It wasn't until Zuckerberg decided it was cool and threw $2 billion at it that people were like, wow. Okay, other than CCP was like, I think, one of the largest studios.
The only AAA.
I think they were the only AAA that was even touching the Rift, and now more people are like, okay, now it's going to survive. And then Sony coming in with Morpheus, that's getting other people, because Sony will, put a lot of muscle behind it as well.
But you still won't see a lot of AAAs in it even today, simply because the market's not there. It's not a consumer device. You can't just go out of the store and buy one. I think they've shipped 150,000 some odd dev kits
Total. That's between 1 and 2.
Yeah. So at a max, that's 150,000 people that can play your game.
But they have demos on their website.
There's a lot of.
There's
Have you seen
ton,
any
yeah.
demos better than Tuscany?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I've had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
One's called Endless Reach.
That one's really good. Some of my favorites are, at Elite Dangerous is like a space combat, like flight sim kind of thing, which is really awesome. And then some of the roller coaster demos are great. I really like Justin Moravitz. He does a lot of really good work.
That's
I think
Proton
Proton
Pulse,
Pulse and
Vanguard V.
Vanguard V.
He actually he actually did a really interesting input method
Right.
for Vanguard V,
Yeah.
which he released. Which Vanguard V, it's like it used to be called Vanguard Valkyrie, and CCP didn't like that. And he's like, "Why did CCP not like this?" And I'm like, "Your first level, you're flying through space,
Yeah.
but it's like Panzer Dragoon. So it's an on-rail shooter like Panzer Dragoon, where you're aiming at things with your head, but it's 3D. You're technically like you're watching through the eyes of somebody that's behind you, and it's kind of like Rez is a way also a game that's it's also like where you aim at a lot of things and then it fires all the missiles at once. But to start the game, because you're doing everything with your head, and Proton Pulses break out with your head, and you're doing everything with your head, so you don't need a keyboard or a controller or anything to do that, but you still need to start the game. And so his bright idea was, okay, so like pretend this is the rift. He's like, okay, tap the side of your rift. Boom. And he registers the tap, and that counts as a button.
Oh, wow.
And so you don't actually have to have a controller, keyboard, or anything. You just tap the side of the rift. And I was like, that's awesome. It's a lot better than, okay, for the menu, you just look at it for like 5 seconds, wait for the circle to go around, and then it selects it. Now you just look at it and tap the side.
Sounds like something he made up on accident. Where
Probably.
he tapped it did something, he's like, oh crap, wait.
Yeah.
I can capture that.
And then just a quick comment to kind of finish that out. In augmented reality, you have things like layer. Nearest to was another popular one where that would show you where the closest subway station was. So there have been limited success applications in augmented reality.
My favorite is Word Lens for augmented
Oh, yeah,
reality.
yeah,
Have you guys used?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just like hold up the thing and it's like, oh, it translates it for me. Sweet.
Yeah, it's a really cool one. So, did you have I'm sorry, you have a question?
So I was curious about presence with. So we've talked about you look down and the roller coaster sim even before there were no legs.
Mhm.
Then I've got skinny legs. That would still work for me.
Not me.
Yeah. What about games where you would take the virtual reality, where you would take the role of a non-human bipedal? And I was running through my head, Alien. What if you took the role of Alien? And when you looked down, you saw backward legs running and the arms. Is there a mental disconnect with that type of presence?
So the question is, if you're creating a presence that won't match like the person on purpose because it's alien or something else,
Is there a mental disconnect?
is there a mental disconnect?
I think there has to be. At some point, like, because you know what you are, right? You're going to look down. You expect to see your human body. If you look down and see some type of alien body, something that's you're not used to seeing, how do you make yourself believe that? That's at that point completely up to the user, as far as I know. Like they have to believe it themselves.
Yeah.
Because we can't simulate that. We can't make you believe you're something else. It's
Yeah,
just not how it
if the
works.
user can suspend disbelief, then it'll be just fine.
Right.
But that's all on the user. There's nothing you can do but present it and hope that they suspend the disbelief and achieve that.
I would say that's a game design issue, right? Because in any game, you have to within the first level, you have to get buy-in from your player and get them to believe that the world you've created is something that they want to even be part of. And the classic games do it best, where it's like the very first level, like Super Mario Brothers. Like everything you will ever do in that game, you have to do in that first level. But it trains you, and then you get buy-in. The bricks are breakable and things like that. So for that, I think that's going to be like a game design thing, to where you're going to have to do some kind of introduction to get buy-in from the player. They're going to look down and see spooky ghost feet, or Godzilla.
That's something I've struggled with a lot designing in this Reach, was simply because I made a shoot 'em up, right, for people that like space shooters, like Gradius and R-Type, and it's really hard. So like for me, I think it's easy. I just go through and pull stuff up. But like when I play test it with people, it takes them forever. They die like 100 times before they get anywhere, and it's just like, I end up having to sit down and explain to them how to play, and a lot of that is just because I put these mechanics with the Rift where you have to kind of like lock on target by looking at something, and some of it just is not really intuitive, and that's something I really like about Justin Moravitz's work, where he just uses the Rift to to do all of the mechanics. So, you know, looking around is already really intuitive. You already know how to look around, you know, so that you can just look at something. So yeah, trying to make it more intuitive for everybody to get into it really easily, you know.
But Vanguard V also kind of messes with your head a little bit in the same way, because the main character is a woman in there, and you're in this spacesuit. And I don't know if you remember, like in Metroid Prime, if like a light came up, you could see the reflection of Samus' helmet, because you're technically inside a helmet. Well, you're technically inside a helmet in this, and you can actually see the reflection of the main character, and she's blinking every once in a while, and it's very faint.
Yeah.
But like you're looking, you're looking at a reflection of a woman. Her eyes are right there, and it's right where you would be. And so he does that a little bit too, and you just eventually get used to it and look through her and stuff.
One last tie-in, I think it ties in with proprioception, which is your sense of knowing where your hands are in virtual reality. So taking that from legs to actually arms, it'd be interesting to see, and I don't know what the answer is honestly, but if you changed the mechanics, like if you had stretchy arms or alien arms or whatever they would be, can users actually control that and make sense of where their hands are physically, but then cast into the virtual world as well?
Yeah, and that's a difficult problem to solve.
It's a
you know, just trying to reach out into the virtual world's already a difficult problem to solve.
Since Sony announced their Morpheus headset, do you think that's a chance for Sony to be able to potentially revive the PlayStation Vita, since it's practically a dead piece of hardware?
Okay, so the question was, will Morpheus save the Vita? No.
Or, I wouldn't say no, I think could it?
Good. No. Well put. Because it's for the PS4.
So they're not going to integrate with the Vita?
Now the Vita does have that like cross-play thing, I guess, where
Right.
you can play kind of your PS4 game on your Vita, and I guess it'd be possible at some point where maybe they could have some type of Bluetooth headset that's a Sony capable device that could link to your Vita, and you use the Vita kind of like you use a controller now, but it syncs to your headset. And that's something maybe like Gear VR, which is like for a mobile device, but in that case it'd be for your PlayStation Vita.
Yeah. Now the way that the Morpheus, the current Morpheus, the way it works is that it hooks. It's actually a breakout box that has its own CPU and GPU in it that hooks into the PS4.
Yeah.
And so that's what drives everything. Because I was fortunate enough to be able to try one, and then that's what feeds into the headset. So I don't see it integrating in its current, or in the form that it was in June. I don't see that integrating with the Vita at all. There's no reason to use a Vita with it.
So I was wondering, what genres of games do you guys think would work well with virtual reality beyond the obvious, like horror works well, walking simulators work well?
I know horror is the big one right now. The question was,
What genres?
types of games
What genres work well?
Yeah, horror is the big one right now because the jump scares are really easy in virtual reality, right? So something I've been experimenting with is trying to find other ways to bring different genres of gaming into virtual reality. You know, because gaming already encompasses a lot of different perspectives. You know, we have like isometric dungeon crawlers and 3D platformers and 2D side scrollers and all these different types of games and all these different mechanics that are made possible by those perspectives. And I believe to keep gaming as diverse as it is today, going forward into the future using this technology, you know, we're going to have to solve that perspective problem and bring those things into virtual reality. So right now, I feel that the best demos are still the first person ones. They're the ones that are most likely to create presence. You know, but to solve, you know, bring in other games, I think it's totally possible to make something like a vertical shooter, which I've already done in this reach. I think it'd be possible to make, you know, a real-time strategy game that you look top-down, a dungeon crawler like Diablo, you know, same thing. Absolutely, I think you can build probably anything you want to at that rate, and it'll be capable for just about every game you could possibly imagine.
I'm not gonna lie. I think virtual reality is not that interesting. Augmented reality is where that's my horse in this race. Like, which kung fu is better? I'm gonna go with augmented reality. Honestly, virtual reality has got this gigantically huge, beautiful first impression, and then after that, you find out that she's got no first impression. Like, that's why we're struggling with all these things. You're trying to solve so many problems because you've created an absolute new reality. So now you have to create absolutely everything in that environment. That's why we don't have a colony on the moon. Because to live on the moon, everything you need to live, you have to take with you. It's really hard to do that. It's also why we don't, well, as far as I know, we don't have a colony on the moon. But,
Maybe not seen Iron Sky. The Nazis are already there.
That's the next talk.
So for me, one, I'm an engineer, so that's German or Latin for lazy. I'm not sure which. So I'd rather add to a reality where everything is already here for me and I can play with things. It's also why I kind of said earlier with augmented reality, the first thing you think of is a visualization, but it goes beyond that. It gets into, I'm a big fan of ARG games, and that requires no technology. This requires creativity. And then, this might date me a little, but I remember just seeing in the theater for the first time, Let the Wookiee Win. They were playing holographic chess. I want that. It was awesome. And that was, they didn't have to put on headsets. Can you imagine putting a Rift on a Wookiee?
I've seen something similar with Cast AR, right? Where they basically project like the chess pieces and you can like pick them up.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do your projections, you can do your underlay maps. If you go to Vegas, I mean, they have like these AR demonstrations that are amazing. Obviously, it's to keep the kids busy while you're losing money at the table, but they'll have entire projected goldfish tanks or water tanks. You go as you walk, it's sensing and doing ripples. They're doing that completely with projectors. So that's my dog in this race. I think augmented reality is the one that you can get more out of with less investments and more buy-in because it's less foreign.
Right. And I think that goes back to not having to replace your presence. You don't have to rebuild it and recreate it in the virtual world. You don't have to do that with augmented reality technology. You're already present.
Given the history of VR, how do we go forward and create the market so that we can see the games or the products that could be big successes to get like AAA's involved?
Money. Well, the question is how do we get to the point where...
Yeah, like how do you make people want to invest into it?
Yeah, so the question is how do you make people want to invest in it? Unfortunately, you gotta spend money to make money. And so one of these needs to make it out onto the consumer market and actually have compelling software to go with it immediately when it comes out. Like I consider the Oculus Rift, I'm going to consider that the same way I consider any console launch. What's the titles that are going to be on launch day? What's going to make people want to go down and buy a $200 or $300 headset? And you just need to, somebody needs to make that first leap and get it out there for people to buy, not just for people to come to a conference or to Vegas to test. And you just need to make that leap, and then hopefully the word of mouth will spread from there.
Yeah, something's going to have to catch fire first. Someone's going to have to strike gold. I mean, that's just where real money will only follow where they think money will be. So some indie's going to have to go out and do something, and that's why a VR indie success is going to be so hard. It's because the adoption rate. First off, right now you can't really buy a headset yet unless you want to get a dev kit, and when they do arrive, I kind of have some hope that Sony's going to do it because they're already invested so much. But then again, they also put a whole bunch of money into the PS1's little camera that was on top of the TV. Remember that thing?
Yeah,
The iToy.
The iToy. So they put a lot of money and time in that. And there was, that was when people were like, oh, we're going to have video calls and crazy stuff. So
Tom Selleck was sitting there saying, "You will."
yeah. It's a lot. I want to see the ones on the cutting room floor that they never published.
I know.
But so that would be that would be required. You need a large install base of headsets that already exist, and then you need some small team, some indie probably, to go out and make just that killer app that strikes gold to get AAA's and everyone else to really treat it as more than just a gimmick.
Yeah, and right now, like I had a friend who was, he was big into virtual reality. Like he has a VFX1 still, the old and ran in MS-DOS back in the 90s. It only ran Descent, I think, was the only game it worked with.
It's only gave me these days.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. And he was asking me, he's like, so is there any game that is like, or any demo that's on the Rift that can't be played on, like, could not be done on a monitor? And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. There is not a single game that I can think of that's currently made by the indie space that I've seen that can't be done on a normal monitor. There is no, other than the cool factor of, oh, now it's all around me, there's nothing out there yet that says you can only play this or only have this experience in VR.
Yeah, something that forces you. I feel, I watched Iron Man 2 nights ago. And there's a reason that I'm telling this story. It's not just to go off on that tangent.
Good, okay.
But, there's a scene where his father is going through rehearsing, this is the future and everything else, and then he tells his son, hey, this is for you. I'm limited by the technology that I have in my time. I can't do the things that I want to do. And so all of this discussion has been, there is no killer app in AR right now. There's nothing that you must have that forces you to use AR or to put on a Rift or any of these other kinds of things. And so I think right now we're at a point where it's still in its infancy. We don't have the correct display. We don't have the correct tracking. We don't have the correct interaction techniques. And so when those things come out, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a shift. As soon as technology comes out that supports the way that we're supposed to interact, not by putting on all this extra gadget and everything, but as soon as that comes out, then you're going to start to see, oh, okay, I can put on contacts. I know that there's some researchers that are working on contacts that are displays. And so those are the kinds of things that I think are going to allow people to walk down the street, have natural interaction, see the kind of information that they want to see, and still be able to do their daily tasks.
It's interesting the point you made about there's nothing on a Rift that you can't do on a monitor. So I had a pretty big breakout game for AR. I say breakout, it was like 500,000 downloads. For the free version, like 20 downloads for the paid version. But it's called Zombie Room AR. I'm pretty sure it's still out there. But the point of the game was basically a platformer. You print out a whole sheet of paper as the target image. It is on Android. And using the Qualcomm, it was called QCar back then, now it's Euphoria is the name of their library. So using that, this is when it was in its early beta. It was a little platformer where you had to basically trick zombies to go over traps and then trigger traps and do stuff. And that was a fun little game, and it was neat. It was a different use of AR at that time because a lot of people weren't doing, no one was really doing that yet. And I got some acclaim. I got written up in Kotaku, and it really took off in Japan. And in the Japanese Kotaku, they were like, this is great, this is amazing, but why is it AR? Why can't you just make this game normal? And I was like, you jerks, you can't win.
Because it needed to be done.
Yeah, I was like, because I'm a huge fan of AR, but that was the thing. It was this double-edged sword where it was like, well, why do it in AR when you could do it in the non-AR environment? So it's just, but then again, it's the internet, so because internet.
Well, I wanted to ask about the other industries that may use this. I mean, certainly Department of Defense or even health fields, but certainly mental health facilities, areas which where I work with my students on service projects that we try to work with people who have disabilities, mental disabilities. But could you talk to how some of this technology may be hitting that type of industry? I mean, this isn't commercial, but it still serves a purpose. But
so the question is, how can this technology help in the
medical
healthcare,
fields,
medical
yeah.
industries?
So one industry that I know that a lot of people are excited about is actually, because I used to work, I am a programmer in my day job, I don't work in games or anything, but I used to work in the real estate industry on websites, and builders being able to create the 3D model of the home and then go in the Rift and walk around and see that they messed up the calculations on this beam before they build the home.
Yeah.
That is, they're doing stuff like that, and then I know that like AR, a lot of people are using it. Like now my job, I actually work with, I don't know if a product, cloud computing product, a lot of people have used, and I had never heard of it, Salesforce, where they actually have this entire thing called Salesforce Wear, where they're actually exposing their API to things like Google Glass and other AR, and they actually just added the Oculus Rift like a couple weeks ago. I'm like, ooh, really? Sweet. There are companies out there that are trying to do, put it into the sales space where maybe, they could have a 3D model of something and you could see it on the shelf and see what it would look like on the shelf and then send that back to your marketing department or something like that. So that's a VR and an AR example that I've seen that other people are excited about.
I've seen three really cool uses outside of the gaming industry for virtual reality. I don't know so much about augmented reality, but I'm sure they're using similar solutions for these. The first one was exactly what he was just talking about. I have a buddy that works at a company called Steel that's right here in Atlanta, and they make rebar, basically. But they have the contract to do the new Atlanta Falcons Stadium. So one of the things that I was trying to convince them to do was to basically build this, because they're going to do it anyway. They're going to build the stadium as a 3D model first. And why couldn't they just add wrist support and allow you to wander around the stadium before they spend, billions of dollars building the stadium? So yeah, that's a perfect use for it. The second one that I've seen is something the Navy actually does. They use the Oculus Rift to pilot their submarines or something like that under their aircraft carriers. They launch a submarine and it's like a totally unmanned thing, and they've got some dude on their submarine who's just like floating around with the Rift, like piloting this little unmanned sub under that. So that's something that they're working on. So that could be into kind of as far as defense goes, kind of crazy. The third one that I've seen is actually in the psychological field, where they've started doing this thing where they're basically recording your brain waves while you sleep. So they stick a bunch of electrodes on your head, and then you pass out. And what they did is they took like a focus group of like 10 people, right? And they showed them a picture of this guy, and people had to basically, and they told them, go to bed, dream about this guy. And then they recorded their brainwaves as they slept, and they thought about this guy or dreamed about him or whatever. And then what they did is they used those brainwaves in aggregate, and then they rebuilt the image based on what all of these people saw, and they rebuilt that in 3D so you could watch it in virtual reality. And that's kind of like, at that point, it's kind of like recording your dream so that you can rewatch it when you wake up, kind of thing. And that's
creepy.
Yeah.
You're gonna have dream hackers.
Yeah. So I mean, like, and that type of stuff is coming. It's very strange to see. And I mean, it's an early stage type use, of course. But
There's one group I got to meet. It's offshoot, but the same people that started the Doctors Without Borders NGO. And I think the title they have now is Physicians Without Boundaries. I don't know how that's not going to compete, but the short of it is that they're coming in to, instead of just sending doctors to where it's needed in countries that are maybe in conflict or whatever, now trying to, since cell phone adoption is near global, in even like the most desolate places, is being able to do, especially pediatric checks, where a doctor can, via these interfaces, actually get like a good exam of children and things like that. I saw they were playing with some AR markers to do things, because with a video image and being across the world, they'll do things where they'll stick a marker on a kid's cheek, which will then do an image of like what certain scales are and what measurements are, so that it can actually be exact. Especially when you're looking for any sort of neurological issue, like the eyes are the gateway to neurological issues. So it's really important to be exact on measurements of like how far away are things from each other. I don't know, I'm not a doctor, so I can't really speak to what they're really looking for, but that's really exciting for me. That I'm going to be able to, very quickly be able to get top talent to be able to look at anyone, anywhere.
I'd say one last follow-up on that is it's been one of the long-term dreams for a lot of AR researchers to integrate medical visualization. So you take CAT scans and ultrasounds and then embed them into the patient so that you can see, where tumors are and such. But again, it goes back to tracking. You have to have very accurate tracking, because you don't want to say, okay, cut here, and then an inch off could be fatal.
How long do you think we're away from that technology actually helping us, with tracking, if that's such a big issue? I mean, is that what's your? I mean, is
So the
that
question is,
guess?
how long or how far off are we technology-wise to do that?
Yeah.
You want to take a stab at that?
So as long as the economy holds,
Yeah.
so I'm going to say a while.
It's a tricky thing, because you have to know, a lot of the tracking technology is now pushing in on doing visual tracking, right?
Yeah.
But it also requires, they've tried stereoscopy to acquire depth, but I think it's going to have to be a mixing of different technologies to be able to really do that. So it's easy enough to know where you are, I think, but then you really have to know what you're looking at, and that's going to require depth and sensing and knowing. I don't know how that's going to manifest, but I know it's going to have to be this mixing between technologies.
There's a couple of hurdles that have to be met first. The first one is that for any of this to work, you want to do it in a machine that doesn't cost $40 million. So that there's some just sizing and cost issues that we have to get down. And then I think there's still some like physics issues they have to figure out of, because when we're trying to get depth from a 2D image, I know there's several different techniques, and I don't believe any of them are precise. So yeah, it's gonna be a while.
I think we have time for one last question.
So to piggyback on that, I mean, wouldn't you be asking the same question as how long until we get the holodeck? You know, I mean, this idea of maybe the Internet of Things where everything has sensors in it, everything has depth perception, and maybe you can ping off of stuff that gets your position data. And then you can say, oh, I can set up this virtual world inside of a room with just cameras and maybe stuff. And you can, just virtually place things in that room. So,
So the question is, when are we getting the holodeck? Basically what it is.
isn't it at the same time
Well, you
as
mentioned-
when you get the
You mentioned
imaging?
the Cast VR, if I'm thinking right, that's the one where you have glasses, but it has projector.
Right.
So as you're looking around, it's projecting onto a reflective.
So how long before we get the
It has
capacity
to have that mat,
to be able to do
right?
that?
You put the mat down and it'll project onto the mat.
So what's kind of cool about,
Has to be
so
one
again,
powerful
what you
camera.
have is you have a curved screen, and you're wearing these glasses in a dark room, and it projects an image. And so everybody could be standing around looking at the same thing, sort of thing.
Yeah. And I don't think we're too far off from that. And we already have technology that will do that, just not well. To get it to a point where it's consumer ready for everybody to do, I mean, that will take a long time. I think, I don't think we'll see that within 5 or 10 years.
No, I mean, I've seen somebody did basically it was using the Oculus Rift, hooked up to a laptop in a guy's backpack, but they also had a phone attached to the front of it, and they were in this long room, and they weren't using the phone to feed you visual data, but they actually had the AR type of stuff on the walls to denote where the walls were, and that was the boundaries of the virtual world. So you could walk around the world, but it knew where the walls were in the house. And also they had tile, like every foot they would have something on the ground as well to judge distance, so you could actually look around and it would know exactly where you were. There are people already working on that kind of stuff, and they actually did say this is based off the holodeck. But all the holodeck technology, that's more, you don't need to be wearing anything. It's projected on the walls, and then somehow it magically transports you over to the other side when you're about to hit the wall, so you can have the endless space. We're a while from that.
To get you untethered, I think we're decades away from that.
Yeah.
And I just want to clarify, you don't want to touch things in the holodeck, do you?
Well, that would be a totally different problem. to
That
solve.
technology is far off.
That's really far. That's creating actual physics material.
Right. So yeah, that's turning energy
We
into
don't even-
matter.
I have seen a similar solution. It's basically a glove you wear that as you reach out into like a virtual world and you grab a virtual object, it kind of has like these actuators
Sensors.
or something that can kind of push in on you and create tension or force.
Give you the
And it's not really like force feedback like in your joystick or something like that, but they've been able to simulate the feel of like silk and like cloth, so like you can grab it and it feels like you're grabbing a curtain or something like that. And I mean until we get a lot of stuff like that, there's just no way for us to interact with the world.
Now, wasn't there was a thing, I think it's called the Novent Falcon. It was big like 10 years ago or something, but it's actually like it's a little ball that you hold on to, but you can also move around in 3D space. And so like if you're actually touch like a ball that has ridges on it in the virtual world, you can feel the ridges. And I think all it's used for now is so you can shake Hatsune Miiko's hand. I think that's the only thing anybody uses it for. But it was like 10 years ago, I remember seeing it at like GDC.
Yeah, they have a lot of haptic.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's called the Phantom. I can't remember the name of the technology, but one other strange kind of thing, at least I thought it was a little bit bizarre, is there's a Japanese researcher who's working on virtual food. So, and I think you actually put a device in your mouth and you can chew. And, so,
dangerous.
It depends on how
nauseous.
extreme you want to get.
Yeah.
But for I think
Well,
one of the
virtual
first few
food have no
questions
calories.
was- That's true. I think one of your parts of your question though is, are those two technologies going to arrive around the same time? And I think what you're talking about with the holodeck, as long as we don't touch it, is probably going to happen a lot sooner because the precision doesn't need to be there. You can be off and no one will die. You can be off and you won't diagnose someone with, you know.
Isn't it more likely to show up as augmented reality though, rather than virtual reality?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Wouldn't it be more likely to show up first as augmented reality versus the virtual reality side of it?
Would it show up as augmented before virtual?
Yeah.
Possibly. I don't think that they're the same branch though. I think it's actually two separate development paths. I see a future in AR forever. I think VR will always be around. I think AR is going to continue to climb because it's just an easier task. VR, on the other hand, is going to require some killer apps, and it's going to require just a mentality adoption.
Well, I think we've run out of time. Thank you to our panelists.
Yeah.